backroads of rural Maine, where dirt paths twist into a forgotten valley, there lies an abandoned apple orchard left to rot since the 1970s. The trees stand blackened and skeletal, their brittle branches clawing at the sky like the bones of something long dead. Waist-high weeds choke the ground, and the locals steer clear of the land. At night, between the rows of lifeless trees, a constant murmur drifts through the wind, like prayers swallowed before they can be heard. They say it's the voices of those who vanished there, never to return. Now Eleanor, a woman in her 50s, has come back to reclaim the land that once belonged to her family. By late afternoon, Eleanor pulled her car to a stop before the rusted gate of the old farm. She stood in silence, staring down the moss-choked path that disappeared into the shadows of the orchard. The two-story wooden house emerged from behind the trees, its roof sagging, windows shattered, the wind whistling through the broken glass like a trapped animal's cry. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, the boards groaning beneath her weight. The smell of mildew and decayed wood invaded her lungs. Beyond the house, the orchard stretched out like a vast graveyard. Hundreds of apple trees stood rigid and blackened, their brittle limbs reaching upward like skeletal hands frozen in prayer. Weeds strangled the roots, spilling across cracked furrows, obscuring the old paths. Yet, amid the desolation, Eleanor noticed something strange. A few branches shivered, leaves clattering together in a dry whisper. But there was no wind. Not even the faintest breath stirred the air. The sound grew sharper, rising like a chorus of murmurs carried from far away, before falling suddenly into silence. At the edge of the orchard, she saw a figure bent low at the base of a tree. A gardener, lean and mud-stained, moving with deliberate patience. He never lifted his head, never showed his face. Eleanor stood frozen, watching until the figure slipped behind a thicket and vanished, leaving only the raw emptiness of the ground behind. Turning back toward the house, Eleanor caught sight of another figure, a minister standing not far away. He paused only briefly, his eyes fixed on the orchard with a gaze that lingered like a warning left unspoken. Then he turned and drifted into the pale gray mist settling over the valley. Dusk drained the light from the sky, and Eleanor realized she was standing alone in the stillness. Not every tree here had withered. At the orchard's center, one apple tree towered above the rest, its leaves vivid, trembling under the last traces of daylight. It looked unnaturally alive, as though the entire orchard's stolen vitality had been poured into this single trunk. The sky collapsed into darkness. Eleanor felt the orchard behind her, vast and gaping, like a black mouth whispering for her to step inside. "Ow, Nelly, in the dark." A gray dawn bled across the fields, mist curling thick around the orchard, until it looked like a blurred silhouette suspended in silence. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, breathing in the damp chill, her eyes drawn once more to the single green tree at the center. Through the haze, its canopy glimmered with unnatural vitality, weighed down by countless swollen apples. She moved closer, her steps heavy on the wet earth. At the trunk, she realized these were no ordinary fruits. Their skins were misshapen, blistered, bulging with veins that pulsed faintly beneath the surface. Some hung grotesquely large, as though something inside them strained to break free. Eleanor's body recoiled, but her gaze clung to the sight. One apple dropped. The sound was wrong, hollow, echoing like a shell cracking underfoot. Its skin split open, releasing a thick black ooze that spread across the soil. Inside, for an instant, something small and round gleamed. an eye, human in shape, curling in on itself before collapsing into nothing, leaving only a wet stain seeping into the ground. Eleanor clenched her fists, but dared not stoop closer. From deep within the orchard, the murmurs began again. This time clearer, layered with many voices breathing as one, whispering like a desperate prayer. The sound slithered through the brittle branches, coiling along the trunks until it wrapped itself around Eleanor. She felt it crowding her ears, as though unseen bodies had gathered at her side, whispering just beyond her sight, though before her stood only the corpses of trees. Movement caught her eye. The gaunt gardener had returned, carrying an old wicker basket. He approached the thriving tree and stooped, gathering the twisted fruit as they fell, placing each one gently into the basket. His face remained hidden in shadow, but the slow, deliberate rhythm of his motions carried more of ritual than labor. When the basket filled, he turned and slipped into the rows of dead wood, vanishing without a trace, leaving an emptiness that felt colder than before. The sun climbed higher, but its pale light could not banish the chill. Eleanor retreated into the house, carrying a dread she could not yet name. That night, as she sat alone in the dark, a steady plop echoed from the orchard, the sound of apples striking the ground. They fell in rhythm, each thud mingling with the relentless whispers that threaded through the night, a dirge without end. Eleanor closed her eyes, but the sound clung to her. It crept into her dreams, a voice that did not speak to her, but through her, as if the orchard had found its way into her mind. Thor. On the third night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The valley outside lay in absolute stillness, yet the curtain by her window stirred, as if touched by an unseen hand. In the dark, she heard it, a faint sound at first, like shallow breathing, which slowly unraveled into whispers. They weren't confined to the porch. They seeped into the room, coiling around her bed, slipping into her chest like smoke. She sat upright, her pulse pounding. From the window, the orchard stretched wide beneath the pale wash of moonlight. The dead trees stood rigid, skeletal silhouettes on guard. And in the center, the lone living tree shivered violently, its leaves trembling, though not a breath of wind stirred. The whispers rose into a chorus, hundreds of voices woven together. Some words broke free, clear and sharp. They called her name. Familiar voices, voices she hadn't heard since childhood, voices long buried in memory. Eleanor descended the stairs, the rotted floorboards glowing faintly where the moonlight fell. When she opened the front door, a current of icy air wrapped around her, urging her toward the orchard. Each step sank into the damp earth with a dull, sucking thud, blending with the murmur that thickened around her. It no longer felt like sound. It clung to her, burrowing into her heartbeat, as if someone whispered directly into her ear. At the foot of the green tree, she froze. From its bark bled a viscous tar-like sap, running down in glistening streaks. The soil beneath the roots pulsed, swelling, sinking, like the breath of something alive. The whispers swelled with it, rumbling through the ground, as though the orchard itself was one colossal, living body. Far off, in the shadows, something shifted. The gardener stood between two rows of withered trees, his narrow shoulders hunched. He didn't approach. He didn't vanish. He simply watched. His silent presence made Eleanor's skin crawl, but the voices at her ear tugged her back toward the roots. When she returned inside, a book waited on the table. Dust filmed the cover, its spine cracked and brittle, yet it lay open on a passage she knew she hadn't touched. Faded ink spelled out fragments, the forbidden fruit, the mingling of blood and soil, the feeding of souls. Eleanor's breath caught. She hadn't left this here. Outside, the whispers pressed against the window panes, hammering every word into her skull. The night stretched long. Eleanor sat awake, rigid, her ears straining. Footsteps circled the house, measured, deliberate. The tread was unmistakable. Her own footsteps, the exact rhythm she had taken through the orchard that afternoon, now played back to her, endlessly, tauntingly. Each time they ceased, the whispers surged louder, faster, more insistent, urging Dal, waiting. By dawn, Eleanor slumped in her chair, her body hollow with exhaustion. But she knew the truth now. The orchard had found her. It would never release its call, and the whispers would not stop, not until she stepped deeper into its darkness. Okay. The day dragged on in a haze of exhaustion, yet Eleanor found herself unable to leave the house. Each time the thought of escape flickered through her mind, the whispers rose again, an invisible wall of sound pressing her back. She sat on the porch, eyes fixed on the orchard, watching the brittle branches twitch without cause. By nightfall, the fog rolled in heavy and thick, smothering the path. Moonlight washed the orchard in a pale glow, turning the trees into twisted pillars of bone. Heart pounding, Eleanor stepped into the mist. Her body trembled, but her feet carried her forward, deeper into the maze of dead rows stretching endlessly in every direction. The voices came clearer than ever before. Not just strangers now. Woven among them were the tones she knew by heart. Her father's stern voice, her mother's soft cadence, the faint laughter of her sister, long dead. The sound tangled around her, calling her name, flooding her mind with flickers of memory. Family dinners, warm hands once clasped, now nothing but dust. She shook, but her heart lurched toward them. At the orchard center, she stopped. From the fog emerged figures, blurred at first like vapor, then sharpening into faces. Her father's stern eyes, her mother in her faded dress, her sister with her hair cascading loose. They stood silent beneath the skeletal trees, their skin pale, almost translucent in the moonlight, their eyes bottomless, locked on Eleanor. She staggered back, but the faces did not fade. They drifted with her, step for step, yet no footfalls echoed on the ground. Only the whispers persisted, this time spilling from their closed mouths. Words without meaning tangled into a low, droning chant, warped and endless. In their midst, the lone green tree loomed, its twisted canopy alive with grotesque fruit. Apples glistened in the dark, shining like eyes. One dropped, rolling to Eleanor's feet. Its skin split open, revealing a child's smiling face before collapsing into a slick of black liquid that bled into the soil. The gardener appeared again. This time he was close, standing right beside the living tree. Moonlight carved his gaunt features into shadow and bone. His hollow sockets stared upward, while his thin hands clung to the bark. When his mouth opened, the same whispers poured out, merging seamlessly with the voices of the orchard, as if he too had become one of them. Eleanor realized she was sitting on the cold ground, though she couldn't remember lowering herself. The chill seeped through her dress, her trembling hands resting on her lap. Around her, the faces closed in, slowly leaning nearer, until the icy breath of their skin brushed hers. At the center, the tree quivered, its strange fruit trembling violently, as if feeding on her very presence. Above, clouds devoured the moon, plunging the orchard into suffocating dark. In that moment, Eleanor felt it. The orchard, inhaling, its breath filling her chest, exhaling in unison through her own lungs. The whispers roared in harmony, 1,000 voices braided into one. And for the first time, she understood. It was an invitation, a demand, a promise of reunion forever. And Adi, when dawn never came, the sky hung heavy, thick with a gray so dense it seemed to swallow the light itself. Eleanor sat motionless at the edge of the orchard, eyes locked on the lone green tree that pulsed with unnatural light. Around it, the dead trunks stood in their endless rows, but in the silence, she felt them waiting, as though each rotting vein of wood carried a faint, patient heartbeat. The faces emerged again through the fog. Not just her parents and sister now, but countless others. Strangers with hollow black eyes and sealed lips, their silence taut with demand. Yet, the whispers no longer came from them. They rose instead from the soil, from the roots, from the relentless pounding in Eleanor's chest. Her hand brushed the ground. The earth trembled, yielding soft and damp like living flesh. Beneath the grass, her fingers grazed sharp fragments, small bones, human teeth, rings tarnished with rust. The orchard was not merely dead, it had been fed. Every soul that vanished had seeped into its roots, its fruit, its endless murmurs. At the center, the green tree shuddered, convulsing with hunger. Apples cascaded to the ground, bursting open in wet cracks. Inside lay shreds of dark red tissue, scraps of shriveled skin. The air thickened with the stench of blood and rot, so heavy it clawed at the lungs. Eleanor swayed, her head swimming, yet her feet carried her closer. The faces leaned low, eyes burning with expectation, the circle closing in. They did not move, yet their silence pressed on her, an invisible weight driving her toward the tree. The whispers had become one sound now, a single, drawn-out note vibrating through her skull, a command, a summons to return to the source. She placed her hand on the trunk. The bark was cold, thrumming like a living pulse. In that instant, Eleanor felt herself unravel. Her breath, her blood, her very sense of self seeped downward into the veins beneath the soil. Darkness filled her vision, not with fear, but with a stillness so absolute it seemed to hum with hidden voices. By morning, the gardener stood among the trees, an empty basket in his hands. The green tree was heavy with fruit, its leaves lush, casting a cool shadow over the ground. There was no sign of Eleanor. Only the whispers remained, softer now, as though a new voice had been folded into their song. And from that day on, the orchard grew quieter than ever. But for those who dared to step close and listen long enough, there was always one more note in the chorus of the wind. New Day. In Montana, nestled among mist-laden mountains and dense pine forests, lies a lake so clear it is known as the Mirror Lake. Locals whisper that its surface is a veil between two worlds, a place where death never truly ends. They warn that anyone who gazes too long will lose themselves, while, at times, the departed will stare back from below. On nights when the moon is full, the lake glows like glass, reflecting not only what exists above, but also what was never meant to exist at all. Yoni, child. Daniel, a former professor who had devoted his life to philosophy, arrived in Montana with nothing more than an old suitcase and a soul weighed down by grief. The sudden death of his son had carved an emptiness in him that no words or wisdom could mend. He chose Mirror Lake as his refuge, for it was said that the silence there could soothe even the most broken heart. On his first night, he sat at the shore, watching the moon scatter into 1,000 shards of light across the glassy surface. The lake was so still that every small movement of his body reflected back with unnerving clarity. Yet, something in the mirrored eyes staring up at him was not aligned. The reflection lingered a beat too long. Its faint smile faded, though Daniel was certain he had not smiled at all. A lone woman rode past in silence, her silhouette small and fragile against the shroud of fog. The ripples her boat left behind stretched outward, and Daniel saw more than her shadow on the water. For a fleeting moment, there appeared a line of figures standing behind her, motionless, waiting, before dissolving as the waves smoothed over. Daniel shut his eyes, desperate for stillness, but even in darkness, the lake remained carved into his mind. It was not simply water. It was a vast, unyielding mirror, a threshold waiting for something else to step through. Ni, pai shui. In the days that followed, Daniel returned to the lake every afternoon. Sitting for hours on the shore, his gaze fixed on the crystal-clear water. The light shifted with the passing hours, yet the lake always retained its cold, mirror-like sheen, reflecting every cloud, every tree, every line of his face. And yet, at times, that reflection lagged a beat behind, as though it hesitated before responding. One evening, just as night fell, Daniel saw a figure appear beneath the surface. It was not his own reflection. It was a boy, standing in the still water, eyes wide open, staring upward. Daniel's heart clenched, for in that instant, the figure was achingly familiar. The narrow shoulders, the youthful face, it was his son, the one who had died in a terrible accident the year before. Daniel leaned closer. The surface of the lake remained smooth, lit only by the moon stretched into a blinding white streak. But below, the boy smiled. That smile did not exist in Daniel's last memory of him. It was slow, fixed, as if carved into an invisible sheet of glass. He reached out, touching the water. It was icy, seeping into his bones. Ripples spread outward, distorting the boy's face for a brief moment before it returned whole again. But this time, the boy's lips moved, as if whispering. Daniel heard no sound, yet the ripples against his skin formed a rhythm, like a voice trapped deep in a throat. Across the lake, a boat glided past. The woman who rowed sat motionless, her gaze fixed on Daniel. Her reflection on the water warped, stretched, and pressed close to the boy's image. But beneath the surface, her face was not the same. Her skin was pale, her eyes hollow, empty as a winter lake. Daniel turned away, and when he looked back, his son was gone. The following night, he returned again. This time, the boy appeared more clearly, as though rising closer to the surface. The moonlight traced his delicate features, but in his eyes lingered a heavy shadow. Daniel realized the small figure was standing in a warped world, a twisted version of the lakeside, where trees bent unnaturally and the sky lay torn apart. Grief and longing bound him in place. He knelt, his gaze locked on the image below. The lake had become a pane of thick glass, one that could shatter with the slightest touch. Every droplet of dew that fell rippled outward, like a door creaking open. And in the dreadful silence of the night, Daniel felt a hand, small and frozen, gently press against the shadow of his own, reaching out from the other side. Dinim, wawa, I'm sore. The next night, the wind from the forest blew cold, carrying the damp rot of decayed pine needles. Daniel sat by the lake, his gaze fixed on the still surface. The lake was like a massive pane of glass, reflecting the torn sky and the smudged silver moon. But when he leaned closer, the reflection warped, twisted like a painting in a distorted mirror. In the lake's surface, the pine tree behind him bent like broken bones. The moss-covered rocks became heaps of skulls. And in the midst of that warped scenery, the boy appeared again. His dark eyes shimmered, never leaving Daniel, his mouth opening in silence. Daniel strained to listen. At first, it was only the rustle of wind in his ears, but then an unfamiliar sound rose from the depths of the lake. A call, thin as a thread, stretching into the air, seeping into his chest. It wasn't just an echo. It seemed to come from inside his own ribcage, forcing his heartbeat to follow its rhythm. The surface of the lake trembled faintly, ripples crawling outward, stopping abruptly, as if something below was pounding against the glass, desperate to break through. Daniel trembled, but could not pull away. The moonlight stretched into a sharp streak, like a blade dividing two worlds. The boy raised his hand, the small palm pressing against the surface. Daniel's reflection did the same, but the movements didn't align. The figure in the water reached first, then lagged, then convulsed. The eyes of his reflection were filled with darkness, nothing like his own on the shore. The sound from the lake swelled, becoming a long, hollow drone, like a voice calling through thick glass. Daniel heard his own name, fractured in the endless echo. Each thread of sound tugged at him, promising reunion, promising an escape from grief. On the water's surface, the warped world expanded, spilling into the reflection of the sky. The moon fractured into a broken circle, its light dripping down like molten glass. Figures began to emerge behind the boy, hazy, motionless, their faces empty, yet their eyes all fixed on the shore. Daniel felt the ground beneath him soften. Stones, grass, everything seemed to slide toward the depths. The air thinned into mist, his lungs filled only with the smell of cold water. In that moment, a tiny hand broke through the surface, grasping his wrist. The skin was icy, but the grip so strong it sent blood surging through his veins. Daniel froze, caught between terror and yearning. The sound from the other side turned into a low, resonant whisper, inviting him across, urging him to close the gap between two worlds. And the lake was no longer a mirror. It had become a door, trembling like a thin veil ready to shatter, ready to swallow anyone who dared to look too deep. On the fourth night, Daniel returned to the lake on trembling legs. Moonlight poured down, and the water's surface gleamed like an enormous mirror. So cold it seemed that if he bent just a little closer, his skin would freeze into glass. The wind was still, yet the lake was not calm. It moved slowly, like a breathing creature, each rise sending ripples outward, pulling the darkness into its depth. Daniel looked down. The reflection no longer resembled him. The face in the water was older, its eyes sunken, its mouth stretched wide in a crooked grin. Behind that figure stood dozens of shadowy forms, arranged in a crescent, their hollow eyes fixed ahead. They encircled the boy, not touching, as if awaiting a ritual. The world around the shore began to change. Straight pine trees twisted and split, their hollow trunks peeling like charred skin. The sky cracked apart, stars dragged into streaks of falling light that plunged into the water. Daniel blinked, but the warped world remained, spreading from the reflection and bleeding into reality. He reached out to touch the lake. The surface was no longer cool and clear. It had thickened, viscous like molten glass. The boy pressed closer, his small hand tugging gently. Daniel leaned forward, his whole body weighed down, bones heavy, as if drawn by a magnetic pull below. The whispers rose into a chorus, echoing like an unseen choir. Their invitations wove with the breath of the wind, forming a ceaseless, resonant hymn. Daniel's ears rang, but within the chaos he heard his name distinctly, repeated, rebounding, as though the lake itself was calling him. The ground beneath him gave way. The damp grass softened into patches of cold mud, then dissolved, leaving nothing but water stretching into infinity. He was no longer sitting on the shore, but standing upon a colossal mirror where above and below merged into one. With each step he took, his reflection moved in reverse, lagging, distorting, until it no longer resembled him at all. The boy smiled. It was a rigid smile, like a crack etched across glass, stretching toward his ears. Within the warped reflection, the boy shone brighter than the moon itself, as if he were the center of the lake. The figures around him bowed their heads, leaned toward Daniel, as though welcoming one who had crossed the threshold. Daniel tried to step back, but behind him there was nothing, only the endless expanse of mirrored water. No shore, no ground. The sky above and the lake below blended into an empty void. He cried out, but his voice shattered instantly across the glowing surface, returning as a murmur not his own. A cold wind swept through, and in that instant, the boundary collapsed. The lake cracked apart, not with ripples, but like shattering glass, shards of blinding light scattering into the air. Daniel was pulled downward, his hands clawing helplessly at nothing. His son's image reached out, close enough to touch, but when his fingers closed, he grasped only emptiness. The world twisted, collapsing into a colossal whirlpool of silver, and at its center, the lake had become an open door, devouring the moonlight, and Daniel's soul along with it. Ah! As the silver vortex swallowed his body, Daniel fell into a bottomless expanse. There was no water, no sky, only shattered light drifting around him like fragments of suspended glass. In the emptiness, his heartbeat echoed back at him, merging with an endless murmur. From afar, a figure emerged. It was not his son, nor the faceless silhouettes that had once stood around the lake. The figure was tall, its body sheathed in a dull, translucent shell of glass, shifting with glimmers of liquid light. Its face bore no features, only a flat mask that reflected countless distorted visages, including Daniel's own, repeated, twisted, stretched into fractured smiles. The keeper of the lake moved forward, each step soundless, yet every stride cracked the mirrored ground beneath him, only for it to seal itself again. Around him, pale souls scattered back like mist swept aside by wind. They flickered, writhing, but did not scream. Instead, fragments of their reflections slipped away from their bodies and vanished into the void. Daniel staggered. He realized the boy was no longer there. His son's image had been nothing but a lure, an illusion the lake conjured to draw him across. The truth now stood before him, The keeper of the lake allowed no one to return. A massive hand clad in glass reached out and pressed against his chest. The cold pierced through flesh and bone, and his heartbeat ceased. Daniel looked up and saw himself reflected in the keeper's mask. His face elongating, dissolving into trembling ribbons of light, merging into the creature's body. No gravity, no will remained. Daniel felt his very self unravel, memories splintering and scattering like cracked glass. The image of his son receded, fading like a photograph drained of color, until it disappeared entirely. The keeper stepped back, letting him sink into the whirlpool of reflections. Daniel was no longer the lost wanderer. He had become one of the silent figures that once stood around the boy. His eyes were empty, his body transparent as a frozen lake in winter. Above, the surface sealed itself, smooth as though it had never stirred. Moonlight slid across, reflecting the night sky in flawless silence. On the shore, the woman in the boat dipped her oar, and the vessel drifted through the thickening fog. For just a moment, her eyes tilted toward the lake, where a new shadow had joined the endless ranks of those who would never be freed. And from that night on, Daniel never returned to the shore. Azimu. Deep in the heart of Florida, hidden among ancient palms and choking weeds, lies an amusement park abandoned for decades. Every ride has rotted away, swallowed by time, except for one. A wooden carousel still turns in silence, never ceasing, its painted horses frozen in a grotesque parade. From its rusted speakers drifts a warped lullaby, carried on the night wind like a sinister cradle song. Locals whisper that anyone who lingers near the carousel after sundown will be pulled into a ride with no end, vanishing from the world as if they had never been. Helen pushed through the rusted iron gate, her hands trembling as her fingers brushed against the cold bars, still damp with lingering dew. Inside, the amusement park stretched before her like a graveyard of memories. Helen walked slowly down cracked cement paths, where once bright cartoon murals had dissolved into grotesque stains. The characters' eyes had peeled away, leaving behind black hollows that seemed to watch her. Each step felt like pressing deeper into a forgotten past, a place of memory that did not wish to be disturbed. In the distance, she saw it, the carousel, the only thing untouched. Its canopy was mottled with rust, glass bulbs shattered long ago, yet the platform seemed to radiate a strange allure. The horses stood frozen, their paint flaked and withered, but the wooden saddles gleamed as though someone had only just ridden them. Helen halted, her heartbeat quickening. There was no breeze, yet the faded fabric streamers hanging from the roof stirred faintly, as if the carousel had sighed. Childhood memories surged, days long gone when she had ridden those horses, laughter in the air, the cheerful music lifting her as if the whole sky spun along with her joy. But now, those recollections were draped in dust and shadow, distorted like a dream, unraveling into nightmare. She could not say why she had returned, only that a formless compulsion had drawn her here, an invisible thread pulling each step tighter. Moonlight spilled slantwise across the ride, painting the horses in a pale, sickly glow. Every one of them bowed their heads, mouths parted as though ready to shriek, but they remained silent, suffocatingly still. Helen froze. She felt it, the unmistakable sense of something watching from the dark that encircled the carousel. Somewhere nearby, a drop of metal rang out, a sharp, hollow sound that echoed into the night. Helen knew then she had stepped across a boundary, one that should never have been awakened. Wah-rah! Helen remained rooted before the carousel. The air pressed down like a suffocating shroud, her breaths shallow and uneven. Then it came, a faint sound, weak and jagged, like a saw blade scraping against metal. Suddenly, the silence collapsed, and the air swelled with music. The familiar tune of the carousel, once playful and bright, now shattered and twisted into something monstrous. The melody screamed through corroded speakers, turning childhood joy into a lullaby for the dark. The rhythm faltered, stuttering between frantic bursts and sluggish lulls, as though the entire machine were gasping for its last breath, yet refusing to die. Each note dripped into the air like damp rot, soaking the night in decay. Helen glanced around in alarm, but the park lay deathly still. The other rides were swallowed by darkness, unmoving, while only the carousel glimmered faintly, its broken bulbs flickering with a pale fish-eye glow. Beneath the horses' hooves, the wooden platform shuddered, creaking like bones grinding together. The horses themselves had not moved, yet Helen noticed a change. Their peeling paint seemed darker, as if slick with something oozing from within. Thin cracks along their bodies widened slightly, leaking a faint glow that pulsed like the breath of rotting lungs. A chill ripped down Helen's spine as she realized the warped tune was not coming only from the speakers. It seeped from the ride itself, from the horses' half-open mouths, from the chains that rattled in rhythm. The music faltered, dipping low, dragging out like the ragged exhale of something hidden. The atmosphere around her grew heavier, like standing inside an abandoned cathedral where the hymn had curdled into a prayer for shadows. Then, a wind stirred. Dry leaves skittered around her feet, though the breeze did not come from outside. It swelled from the carousel's heart, from the black hollow at its center. The music fused with the wind, becoming a long, unearthly howl that rippled across the ruins of the park. Helen wrapped her arms around herself, eyes locked on the wooden steeds. For an instant, she could swear one of their mouths curved upward, splitting to reveal cracked wooden teeth poised to laugh. The tune surged suddenly higher, frenzied, and the carousel shook violently, shedding flakes of rust that rained down like metallic dust. There was no mistaking it now. The rusted carousel had awakened, and Helen knew she was no longer a mere spectator. The warped music swelled, reverberating through the abandoned park like a funeral bell summoning the lost. Helen stood frozen, her gaze locked on the carousel. The wooden horses, motionless for so long, began to tremble. At first, it seemed no more than a trick of flickering light, but then the movements sharpened, undeniable. Their heads lifted, stiff necks creaking with the brittle crack of splintering bone. From the outer rim, one horse jerked as flakes of paint sloughed off in sheets, exposing the dark grain beneath. Its carved mouth, sealed shut for decades, split along deepening fissures, yawning open into a black void. A breath colder than winter exhaled from it, bending the grass around the platform. Helen staggered back, yet her eyes were caught, trapped. One by one, the horses opened their eyes. Where once black paint had merely suggested sight, now pale light oozed forth, murky, fish-belly white, unblinking. It did not illuminate, but devoured, pulling shadows inward until a fog of darkness thickened around the ride. The music shifted, pounding now with the cadence of a funeral drum. The horses raised their hooves, at first only inches, then higher, moving in slow, grotesque steps. The rusted gears screamed as the carousel lurched, teeth grinding, sparking against one another. The wooden floor quaked, dust cascading like dry rain. Helen could see every grotesque detail, hooves slamming down, leaving dents in the planks, tangled wooden manes rippling as if strands of real hair, and from the widening cracks in their bodies, thick black ichor seeping, dribbling down to stain the platform like rotted blood. The carousel gathered speed. The twisted tune fractured into shrill, howling dissonance. Helen felt the ground itself vibrating, as though the entire park had joined in rhythm with this monstrous machine. The horses moved with uncanny freedom now, heads reared high, glowing eyes slicing through the dark as if searching for something or someone. One horse lifted its head higher than the rest, its chest heaving in a grotesque imitation of breath. Then its hoof struck the floor with a thunderous blow. The sound rang like a death knell, freezing Helen's heart in her chest. She could no longer tell where wood ended and flesh began. Splintered grain coiled like sinew, rigid joints popped like dry bones. The once polished saddles bore scratches and gouges, yet remained empty, waiting for some foolish soul to mount them. A whirlwind burst from the carousel, hurling leaves and grit into a swirling frenzy around Helen. The music climbed higher, shrieking, while shattered bulbs flared in a blinding glare. Within the storm, Helen glimpsed something in the horse's eyes. Her own reflection, small and fragile, dragged toward the turning wheel. She tried to move, but her body was stone. Her legs were anchored, refusing her escape. With every rotation, the carousel seemed to draw closer, as though space itself was collapsing inward, funneling everything into its rusted heart. The music struck a shattering peak. The cracked mirrors dangling from the canopy shivered violently, their surfaces splintering. For a single instant, Helen saw dozens of her own reflections, everyone wide-eyed with identical terror, surrounded by the wooden steeds rising into unnatural light. The rusted carousel had truly awakened. And Helen understood, this time, it would never let her leave. The dissonant music coiled through the abandoned park, tightening the air like an invisible rope cinched around Helen's throat. The carousel groaned as it turned, each rotation dragging with it a metallic wail. Then she noticed them, the old mirrors still clinging to the carousel's canopy after years of ruin. Their glass was fractured, edges jagged, yet they reflected something far too vividly. Helen stepped back, but in the mirrors, her reflections did not follow. Dozens of distorted Helens stood motionless, their eyes wide, fixed on her with hollow stares. In some panes, she appeared older, hair bleached white, falling in tangled sheets. In others, she was young again, her face blank, eyes black and bottomless. Cracks crawled across the glass like spider webs, branching wider each time the warped melody struck a high note. Each shatter split her reflections into fragments, yet they moved still, shifting, twitching, watching. One shard showed only a hand, trembling, reaching toward her. Another held a single blood-red eye, staring unblinking, suspended in its prison. Pain tightened around her skull, as though her own head were cracking with the glass. Within the mirrors, some of her reflections began to move against her. When she stepped back, they stepped forward, their pace quickening, their dead eyes locked to her flesh. The distorted music throbbed with her heartbeat, merging into a relentless drum. A sharp crack split the air. One mirror exploded outward, scattering into a storm of jagged shards. Instead of falling, the pieces hovered, spinning in a slow orbit around her, catching faint, unnatural light. In each shard, another Helen appeared. One screamed silently, another sneered, yet another crawled on all fours like an animal, its body twisted into something no longer human. The carousel turned, the horses' glowing eyes flaring brighter, casting their radiance onto the mirrors. The glass burned with strange illumination, like portals rather than mere reflections. And Helen realized these were not copies. They were possibilities, imprisoned selves, fragments of her soul caught within the glass. Each version pounded against the barrier, desperate to escape. The canopy trembled, and more mirrors split. Shrill screams pierced the air, uncertain whether from the mirrors or from within her own mind. The world shattered into a labyrinth of fractured light, where reflection and reality bled together. Wherever she turned, dozens of vacant eyes followed, denying her any path of escape. One large mirror ahead blazed with sudden brightness. Inside, Helen saw herself seated upon a wooden horse, her body rigid, her eyes wide and lifeless. The reflection slowly lifted its head to meet her gaze, and then its mouth cracked open in a jagged grin. The fissure in the glass aligned with its lips, stretching into a grotesque wound across its face. The warped melody erupted, and every mirror shuddered as though ready to burst apart. Helen was surrounded, trapped within a kaleidoscope of her own distorted selves, each one a death waiting to claim her. And she understood. The carousel did not merely consume bodies in its endless turning. It tore the soul into fragments, locking each piece within the warped reflection of fear itself. Now, ici, ishai, wa. The iron gates of the park groaned, then slammed shut. The impact rang out like a coffin, sealed with a hammer's blow. Helen turned, but the way back was gone, swallowed by a suffocating wall of dark. She knew then there would be no return. The rusted carousel kept turning, faster with each revolution, its warped dirge swelling into a frenzied funeral march. The wooden horses no longer moved in stiff, fragmented jerks. They thundered in unison, galloping with terrifying force, their pale, blind eyes blazing like will-o'-the-wisps. Wooden manes whipped as if caught in a storm, while their cracked mouths exhaled freezing breaths that rolled into a suffocating fog. Helen felt her body pulled taut, dragged by an unseen gravity, as though the earth itself tilted toward the spinning core. She clawed at the rotted planks beneath her, but the wood softened under her fingers, crumbling to slick mud. The world tilted, the shards of shattered mirrors whirling into a silver firestorm around her, orbiting like lunatic planets. One horse lifted its head, its glowing stare seizing her. Her limbs locked, marionette-like, lifting of their own accord. Step by step she walked toward the ride, her will dissolved. At the rusted stair, her trembling hand brushed the railing. The chill of corroded iron clung to her skin, draining what warmth remained. On the carousel's floor, the saddles gleamed slick with the black ichor seeping from cracked wooden flanks. Helen saw impressions embedded into the seats, indentations of unseen riders pressed deep into the wood. The music screamed as she drew closer, until she stopped before one horse split with fissures, its body streaked with stains of darkness. It lowered its head, waiting. She could not resist. Her body leaned forward, hand gripping the saddle. As she sat, agony shot through her spine, spreading in iron chains that hooked into her flesh, binding her to the horse. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged, only a plume of pale breath fading into the mist. The carousel surged. The horses lunged forward, straining against their wooden track, yet bound eternally to their orbit. With each rotation, Helen saw her reflection in the broken mirrors. Not one, but dozens, hundreds of Helens. Some wept. Some grinned with teeth bared. Others crumbled into ash. All of them circled endlessly, prisoners of a ride with no escape. The melody shattered into howls that drowned even the wind. The whole park quaked, yet the carousel remained unmoved, spinning like the rotted heart of the place. Helen saw where the gates had once stood, now vanished, replaced by a void without sky, without ground, only a spiraling abyss drawn into the ride's relentless rhythm. As her vision dimmed, she glimpsed others riding beside her. A boy slumped on his mount, his face blurred into shadow. An old mechanic, his steel-bound hands fused to the saddle. Silent passengers, trapped in the same eternal circuit, revolved with her through endless night. And then Helen understood. The carousel never stops. It is a colossal mill, grinding time itself into dust, tearing souls into fragments, binding them forever to its orbit. The warped music dissolved into darkness. The wooden horses galloped on, their blind eyes blazing, and Helen, now just one shadow among countless shadows, was locked into the ride that would never end. No way.